G'day friends, welcome back to Home Group Leaders Notes. We're at the end of this section of Isaiah, so this will be our last study in Isaiah for the next little while. Next week we're turning back to Matthew's Gospel at the start of Matthew chapter 8. But for now we're at this fantastic ending to this section. So what I thought I'd do is I thought it might be a helpful thing to revisit some of the big structure of Isaiah that we looked at the start of the series right back last year when we started off in Isaiah. Hopefully this will be familiar to you. If not, here it is. Here's a bit of an overview of the big structure of Isaiah. So Isaiah moves from Jerusalem to New Jerusalem, from creation to new creation. And the whole of the book, the whole prophecy has this general flow of moving from a message that is dominated by judgment to one that is dominated by salvation. The judgment and salvation are both in both sections, but that's kind of what the dominant sort of theme is through those different sections. And there's these 4 chapters in the middle, which we'll get to next time when we come back to Isaiah, that form this really important bridge between those 2 sections. But we are up to the end of this first section, the end of up to chapter 34 and 35 this week. The whole book, as I said, moves from creation to new creation, but what you find as you read through is that movement from creation to new creation is sort of repeated again and again as you go through, and that's what this picture here is trying to represent. This swirl here is trying to say this movement from creation to new creation. You see it come up. There's sort of miniature pictures of that all the way through. And Isaiah structures his vision, his prophecy around that, so that what you get is all these smaller sections, these 6 major sections plus the middle bridge part. At the end of which, each of these sections ends with this great outpouring of praise to God for what he will do, for the great things that he's going to do, the great salvation, restoration, and recreation that he's going to bring about. And as you read through Isaiah, that gets filled out more and more what that's going to look like. But back in chapter 12, that was the case. Chapter 27, we saw that. Tim Patrick preached on that earlier this year. And now we've come to the end of this section here with chapter 34 and 35. And what we find there is this outpouring of praise in chapter 35 especially. It might be helpful to print these off for your group just to give them a bit of a picture of the big picture of Isaiah and where we're up to. I think it's sort of helpful to see that where the whole thing's going. So we're taking 2 chapters as a whole. But on Sunday, I'm just going to focus on chapter 35. And I'd probably recommend your groups focusing in on 35, encouraging you to perhaps read through chapter 34. Maybe you could encourage your groups to do that before they've come to home group, if that's possible. Chapter 34 is a really striking graphic vision of the judgment of God on the enemies of his people. So they get focused in on this country of Edom, but Edom is sort of a representative of all of the enemies of God's people who are so threatening to them. And what Isaiah does here is, as he gets to the end of this section, he looks ahead to this day of God's judgment on the nations, when all those who have lived in opposition to God and to his people, who have lived violently oppressive of his people, will themselves be judged. The Lord has, in verse 8, a day of vengeance, a year of retribution, to uphold Zion's cause. So that's where you get this. This is his day of vindication of his people, of his faithful people, of his faithful remnant, as we've sort of seen a little bit on the way through, this remnant of his people. It's pretty graphic and intense. This chapter 34. I'll leave you to read through it. As I said, I'm not going to focus on all the details of that. What's interesting is he pictures this this nation of Edom as becoming like a desert, basically, as becoming overrun with wild animals. By the end of the chapter, that's what you get. Thorns will overrun her citadels. All these wild animals are going to gather there. Basically, a place that has been abandoned. So you get to that by the end of chapter 34. That's the picture you get. What's really interesting is as soon as you get to chapter 35, which is where I'll be focusing, as I said, the same image, it starts with the image of a desert, but there's this incredible reversal, and the whole tone changes dramatically in chapter 35 from this vision of God's wrath and judgment to this amazing vision of a new life and flourishing and strengthening. And of course, that's what you'd expect if God's judgment is his strange work, right? As we saw before, it's his alien task. It's right and true and what he will do, but it's not the end sort of goal. It's not his heart, which is to bring about this restoration and forgiveness for his people. Along the way, as I've gone through Isaiah, what I've tried to do is pick out, I guess, a bit of a theme for each of the passages that stands out in those passages about the Lord and his kingdom. So we've looked at the holiness of the Lord back in chapter 6, the zeal of the Lord, the justice of the Lord, the mission of the Lord on the way through, the Lord's foundation a few weeks ago, the Lord's transformation. Last week we looked at the Lord's rest, the rest that the Lord would give. So this week what I've done is given this a title of the Lord's joy. And I think that does come up as a dominant kind of theme in this chapter. You get to the end of this section, we've had chapters and chapters of bad news mixed with good news, sort of judgment mixed with hope. But right at the end here, you get this ultimate vision of what God is going to do, and it is a picture of joy and just this really life-giving vision. I've split the passage up into a few different sections. That's just my kind of trying to get a handle on it. Or I guess the reasons that Isaiah gives us for this great future joy that he looks forward to. He talks about the desert blooming, so the whole creation. It's kind of a reversal of this curse that's on Edom, that's on the enemies of God and his people. That's reversed for his people. But it's also a picture of this global renewal, this new creation. The weak are made strong, the damaged are healed, the rescued are returned. And there's lots in there, particularly this last section about this highway that is set up, this way of holiness, that I'll leave you to enjoy digging into with your group. But that'll give you a sense for where I'm going with that. My prayer is that at the end of this chapter, we'll have our hearts really gripped by this certain hope that is there for all of God's people, of this new creation, this where everlasting joy will crown our heads, gladness and joy will overtake us on the way to this city. Sorrow and sighing will flee away. Such a beautiful ending to this. So that's the future in store for all of God's people, and this side of Jesus, we know that that's the case for all those who trust in him. It's also a reality that can start to shape us here and now as his people in the light of that certain future. So there's a bunch of really helpful quotes from Barry's commentary down the bottom. I'll leave you to read those and commend them to you. Praying for your groups that will be the case, that as we finish off in Isaiah for now, that there will be a real unity and a longing for this work of God among us and in us, and our hearts tuned more and more to what He's doing and what He will do. So, God bless. We'll I hope the study is really good next week, and we'll see you next time. Okay, see ya.